Hello. Back when I was young, a boxer named Clubber Lang famously pitied a fool named Rocky Balboa. And if you know the story, you'll remember how it was Adrian who helped Rocky overcome his self-pity. And we all know what happened from there. Maybe it's time to re-release Rocky 3. Anyway, I wanted to consider a different story today. I remember my first day at Vanderbilt University down in Nashville, Tennessee. Our cohort of master's students was going through orientation and getting a tour, and I noticed that one member of our group was blind, which was unusual. We'll call him Matthew. He was only the second blind person I'd ever met. Anyway, after we toured the library, we were supposed to head back to our academic building. And I walked up to him and I asked, "Can I help you get back?" And he smiled and said, "No, thank you, but you can walk with me if you'd like." And that was the start of our friendship. And that comment has stuck in my head ever since. No thank you, but you can walk with me if you'd like. I quickly realized that this new friend was capable of a lot more than I had given him credit for. We were part of a cadre of students who planned to get our PhDs in religious studies, a pretty academic and nerdy bunch. Not only was Matt very bright, but I don't think any of us were better read than he was, thanks to Braille and audiobooks. When he and I went to the gym together, he scampered to the top of the rock climbing wall on his first try. He could ride a bike. He invited a group of us to his apartment where he lived alone and made us dinner. And I was amazed that he could tell which girls in school were the prettiest based on how others interacted with them. So this is all to say that any initial pity for Matt disappeared pretty quickly once you got to know him. Sure, he needed help with some things like grabbing the right box of cereal off the shelf at the grocery store. But as I said, it was hard to pity him, and he didn't want your pity anyway. Unfortunately, not everyone got the message. I remember one incident which has stood out to me over the past 25 years. We had a class together with a really excellent professor, one of my favorites ever. However, later in the semester, I remember this professor giving Matt an extension on an assignment that really wasn't merited, and no one else would have received. I don't even think Matt asked for it. To me, at that time, it looked like a pity extension. The problem, of course, is that cutting people slack, giving them a break, is very often not the help we imagine it to be. It can be a curse in disguise. Now, I'm not saying that all extensions are bad, but they do mean that you are concentrating the amount of work due later in the semester. And while that student is trying to finish up the first project, there is a work for additional assignments that's piling up. And it's hard to finish the semester strong when you have more work than everyone else. And that's what happened in this case. And an incomplete in a class does the same thing. It concentrates the amount of work required in the next semester. And that can lead to more incompletes. And that can lead to getting so far behind that you just drop out. When pity leads to lower expectations, cutting someone slack, which is often an act of paternalism, is not really helping that person. It's not difficult to see how easily it can make that person's life worse, despite coming from the best of intentions. Also, I found that most of the time, people don't want your pity. It was around 15 years ago that I took a group of college students to the Philippines. This was the second group I took to a place called Smoky Mountain, technically Smoky Mountain Part 2. And it was a massive trash dump on Manila Bay where hundreds of families, thousands of people lived and tried to scrape out a living. It was brutal. Anyone with a soul was affected, and affected deeply by what they saw around them. It was hard to walk around without a despondent look on your face, and we often stared at the ground in front of us, casting quick glances around at how the poorest of the poor actually live. And some of us were brought to tears. But the people there, the people living there, they didn't value or want or care about our pity. Fortunately, we happened upon a pickup basketball game and asked if we could join. And what followed became an annual tradition, a game between the Smoky Mountain locals and the American visitors from Susquehanna University. And out on the dirt court that first year, there was no pity. We were all trying to win. But there was a lot of laughter as tiny Filipinos tried to deal with a 6'5" Americano in the lane, and he tried to deal with 100-pound guys who could run circles around him in flip-flops and drain three-pointers at will. But it was the mutual respect on the court that brought us together. Mutual respect based on not cutting the other guy any slack, but trying your best to beat him. Not that this eradicated the real material needs of these people, but assistance from a friend is appreciated a lot more and does far more to build community than a handout from someone pitying you. In a different part of the world, it was around this time that the U.S. was involved in the Iraq War. During a previous unpopular war, in Vietnam, too many people took out their frustrations on the returning GIs, calling them baby killers and spitting on them. Unfortunately, America seemed to learn its lesson. However, I noticed that for many in the media, while appreciation for our soldiers took the place of disdain, it often took the form of pity. Every morning, the radio news would tell me how many soldiers had died the day before, but never successful operations. Short biopics told the stories of men and women who lost limbs, suffered disfiguring burns, or struggled to put their lives back together when they got home. None of this, of course, is wrong, and these stories need to be told, but my perception was that these were the vast majority of stories being told. My impression may be off, but it seemed that stories of suffering vets designed to stir pity for them were almost all the stories I came across. War is indeed hellish, and that reality needs to be communicated. But at the same time, the combat vets I've known don't want their service to their country reduced to feelings of pity. Some years ago, I had the privilege of interviewing Brian Anderson, who lost both legs and an arm to an IED. He doesn't want your pity. He's too busy living life and inspiring countless others to do the same. And just like in that trash dump, the reality is hard and the suffering is real and there are ways to help, but taking the approach of pity is not the right way to go. At the same time, we can be honest. Being the recipient of pity does have its allure sometimes. During a very difficult time in my own life, I found that I wanted people to know just how much I was enduring. Things were not okay, and I wanted them to know that. And I suppose I would have preferred their respect for what I was dealing with. I wanted them to know how hard I was working to just stay above water, but I'd settle for pity. It was a poor second choice, but sometimes I'd take it. At other times, I despised those who looked at me as someone who was pathetic, and I hated that. But I did come to understand at that time why we sometimes seek out pity and some of the short-term benefits that it can bring. In other contexts, it's tempting to accept being pitied when people are giving free handouts to the pitiful. But that's a dangerous path. Over the years, I figured out that there is an important line between respecting the person facing challenges and pitying that person. Sometimes it can be hard to make out that line, but doing so is very important. Respecting someone who works hard to overcome unfair challenges drives that person to keep working. Pitying someone leaves them mired in that pitiful state. Maybe that deserves repeating. Respecting someone who works hard to overcome unfair challenges drives that person to keep working. Pitying someone leaves them mired in the pitiful state. The respect of others is what moves us up social hierarchies. Pity has the opposite effect. And the person who receives that respect or pity knows what is happening. That momentum, up or down a social hierarchy, is what furthers a person's trajectory in life. Earning respect by responding to unjust and terrible circumstances with dignity and tenacity, this is what propels us further. Pity tends to do the very opposite. Unfortunately, it seems that our society is moving more and more in the direction of emphasizing pity over respect. Many of us are living and working in communities where the world is divided up into oppressors and those they oppress, those we resent and those we pity. This single and simplistic narrative has come to dominate how we look at history and politics and our social interactions. And far too often, we determine who are the oppressors and who are the oppressed by virtue of their identity groups. And then we pity everyone in those groups. In a nation of 330 million people, viewing everyone according to such a simplistic narrative is beyond silly. Yet we do it with great regularity. Moreover, it has become the norm to overstate the oppression and understate the resilience of those facing difficulties. The result is an exponential growth of pity that we extend to ourselves and others. We imagine the situation is so bad and people are so fragile that we're left looking at this allegedly hopeless situation with pity for all those poor people out there, or ourselves. And pity does not motivate greatness in oneself or in others. To return to my friend in graduate school, the folks at Smoky Mountain, and the combat vets I've known, I have consistently seen the resilience that human beings have. As I tell my students every semester, you are capable of far more than you can imagine. You have strength you don't even know about, and you can handle far more than you realize. In the words of Rocky Balboa, life will beat you to your knees and keep you there permanently if you let it. But you have the resources within yourself to stand up to life's brutality. On the other hand, I see far too many people today selling the opposite lesson, the pity peddlers. They talk to or about certain people and insist that things are just too terrible. The system is rigged. You can't rise above. The American dream is a lie. Pulling yourself up by your bootstraps is false propaganda. You need a safe space. You need a mental health day. You deserve pity. We communicate to strong young men and women that when faced with a microaggression, they should run to the adults to solve the problem for them. We encourage paranoia. We coddle them and make them fragile. We treat them like pitiful things, and not surprisingly, they end up acting like pitiful things. Treating people like they're weak makes them weaker. Treating people like they're fragile makes them more fragile. But treating people like they are strong and capable brings those attributes to the fore. If you care about folks, want them to live happy lives, you can contribute to that by helping them move up whatever hierarchies of competence they're in. On the other hand, if you want to maintain or exacerbate their depressed state, you can do that by contributing to their downward trajectory in those hierarchies. Please don't misunderstand. I know just how challenging and brutal life can be. Rocky was right about life, and he was right about how to respond to life. Those who take what the world dishes out and keep moving forward, those are the winners. But unlike boxing, life is not a zero-sum game. There isn't necessarily a loser every time there's a winner. When you stand up to the viciousness of the world with strength, dignity, and resilience, you empower me to do the same. And when you respect the hard work of one individual, others who see that are driven to earn that same respect, and we rise together. But the opposite also holds. Teach people they're pitiful and fragile, reward them for being pitiful and fragile, and the outcome is clear. And not just for those individuals, but for many others who are watching as well. Now, I'm not going to say that pity is never the right response to tragedy, but do we want to create a society of fragile creatures or resilient fighters? I've seen too many people rise above their circumstances to opt for the former. I'll choose to treat people with the dignity and respect they deserve by counting on their strength, rather than believe they're in need of my pity. Thank you.